Hola, muy buenas tardes a todos y bienvenidos to the live webcast Inclusion Innovation. We are so thankful to have everyone here. My name is Elvia Pacheco and I will be providing support throughout this live event. Before we get started, I want to familiarize you with a few details. At any time during this session, you are allowed to update your audio by using your computer settings. And also do not be alarmed because you will not impact anything of what's happening over here on our platform. At the same time, I want to encourage you to utilize the Q&A tab located at the right-hand side of your screen. This will allow us to present questions at the end of the session as time permits. And without further ado, we're going to get this session started. We're going to invite our Vice President of Diversity and Economic Inclusion for the Greenville Chamber of Commerce, Ms. Natasha Pitts, who will be facilitating the rest of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Elvia. Good afternoon, changemakers. Today, you will hear from subject matter experts as they journey through their work and the significant impact that it has made. Joining us today, we have Camille Robinson, who is the Associate Director of Human Resources with FINRA, Lisette Martinez, she's the Executive Vice President with Jefferson Health and Thomas Jefferson University, and Wade Hinton, he's the founder and CEO of Hinton & Company. I invite you to review their bio, which can be viewed via the DEI Summit virtual event platform. At this time, I would like for us to get started with our first question. So instead of reading their bios, which you can read on your own, I wanted to start out with a unique question. So I want to start with Camille, but each one of them will answer this question. But what is your why, and why are you committed to this work?
Thank you, Natasha. And let me start by saying it's such a pleasure to be here. This is one of my favorite things to do as a part of my work. But my why, in large part, feels like I am doing what I was born to do, at least at this time. I am the daughter of a civil rights attorney and of a Baptist minister. I have my godparents are attorneys and judges and police officers. So I've learned incredibly early the value of effective communication to get what you need, to get what you want. And so a lot of that has allowed me to advance my career in ways that I hadn't expected and show up in corporate spaces and change, the tone for effective communication. And that has allowed me to grow my own career. And then by way of my career following in human resources, aligning my personal passions with my professional skill set has very naturally led me to DEI. And it's been an absolute joy, especially being in a regulatory space.
Thank you, Camille. Lisette?
Thank you. Thank you for having me first. I want to really thank the Chamber, especially Natasha, for having me be part of this amazing Changemakers Summit. Thank you for leading change in your community. And I also want to thank Dr. Nika White for thinking of me and always looking for ways to highlight our work here at Jefferson. Thank you to Dr. White. The work that you are doing to make an impact on your community and in the world is phenomenal. And I'm always proud to be a part of your mission. So the question as to what is my why in working in DEI? So I want to tell you all a personal story, if I can. As Natasha stated, our bios are listed, so you know my work in DEI. But what a lot of people don't know is I actually started my career as a retail buyer. I was a buyer for many years, working for companies like Toys R Us, Chiquita Brands, and Luxottica Retail. And I'm from the Midwest, but when I was working at Luxottica in Cincinnati, Ohio, there was an opportunity that came to my desk looking to begin a diversity, equity, and inclusion department. And I thought to myself, okay, this Italian company wants a DEI company. I started looking through the roles, and they were looking for someone to lead and manage as an inclusion specialist. And when I saw this position, a flashback, a memory hit me with seeing this word, and it took me back to when I was 12 years old. So I want to tell you what happened to me. So I'm actually from Michigan. I was born in Detroit, Michigan, and I was born in the 70s. And early 70s, Detroit was a really black and white community. And I'm a Puerto Rican background is my family, and I really never saw myself in my community. I grew up in a very urban environment. And I remember at 12, our sixth grade class went on a camping trip to Camp Tamarack. And it was when all the sixth grade camps got together, or sixth graders got together at camp. And I was going through the lunch line. And as I looked through the lunchroom, which was called the canteen, I saw that everybody was kind of seated in different places, not like we normally sit, like in our own little classroom seats. But I noticed something that I had never seen or really paid attention to before. And that was that my Black friends were seated on one side of the room and my white friends were seated on the other. Now, they've written books about this because it still happens today. It's a natural phenomenon, but I questioned myself at that moment, like, where do I sit? The counselor's looking at me like, Lisa, what are you doing? I said, well, I don't know where to sit. She said, oh, you can sit anywhere. And I told her, I said, but my Black friends are over here and my white friends are over here. She turned around, noticed it, and immediately, without questioning it, she intentionally made everybody move. And it felt great. I don't even know at that age what I felt. I couldn't express what words it was, but I felt like valued and I didn't know what it was. Now, when I saw that role at Luxottica Retail to be an inclusion specialist, it sparked that memory, but it dawned on me that I felt included. I actually felt like I was part of something and it made me feel included. And I wanted that for this company. And that's my mission, is in this work as a leader in DEI, I want folks to feel inclusion, feel valued, feel engaged, feel part of something, like they belong in this institution. And that's really what drives me into doing this work. And it's all because of what happened to me when I was 12.
Thank you, Lisette. What an impactful story that has kind of shaped the trajectory of your life since you were 12. Wow. Wade?
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Lisette. Thank you, Natasha, and thank you to the Greenville Chamber of Commerce. It's such an honor to be here with you today. I also want to thank Dr. Nika White. She is a good friend, but also a great partner in this work around this country. So, thinking about my why and why I'm committed to this work, similar to Lisette, I go back to my childhood. I was raised in a part of Chattanooga, Tennessee that's called the West Side neighborhood. And in that neighborhood, you only see public or subsidized housing, right? So there was no single family housing at all. So you think about that from an equitable perspective in that community. I went on to become the first in my family to graduate from college. And when I left Chattanooga to go off to college, I remember this feeling. I couldn't describe what it was at the time, but I remember trying to have social outings as a high schooler, and how Black kids, when they hung out, were treated differently than white kids. And so I never felt what I now know is that sense of belonging in my community. So I went off to college and went on to law school. And when I was thinking about where I would go, I considered much larger cities, but I thought about that feeling and also just saw what was still happening in my community. So I decided to come back so I could give back and figure out, how do I actually bridge that divide and create a place of belonging for all? I practiced law for most of my career, but like many of you, the African proverb of if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, really rang true for me, because although I excelled and was the first of many roles, I looked around, there weren't a lot of people that looked like me. So I again thought about my experience growing up and recognized now, especially with a daughter, I looked around and saw that the number of women CEOs in our community, they're less than when I actually moved back home. So I said, I'm going to dedicate my time and all of my energy and all of my talent to try to create a space of belonging, not just for when my daughter grows up, but also for those team members now that want to make progress wherever they are. And so I'm committed to that and dedicated to that. And there's nothing better than seeing those light bulbs go off in leaders that know that they have the power, they have the influence to make that change and really create spaces for others in their organizations. So again, excited about the conversation, looking forward to today.
Thank
And
you,
if I can just hop back in here, I apologize, Natasha. I love hearing Luxottica, Lisette. I actually kind of got my start there as well. So having early on sort of the gift of gab, I actually started in sales in Luxottica and knew very early on in sales, you know, while I was successful and good at it, it was not my thing. And so I moved into training and development, and that's how I started, sort of got my start in HR. And that led me to my DEI career to be able to make broader impact. And also I'll say, you know, just hearing Wade and Lisette's story, you know, resonated so much. You know, for me, having a father as a civil rights attorney and, you know, being, you know, deeply involved in the Black church, but going to private schools, and then my experience with HBCUs and growing up in Baltimore City, there's so many, you know, intersections and populations of people that I was able to find value in, right? And they all look different, and one audience might not find value in the other, but me having, you know, being enveloped in them in a certain way, you know, for really all my life, it allowed me to shine, or allowed me to very naturally see, you know, the value that people can bring when they got the chance. So just shout out to Luxottica for big reasons and for closing that little loop for me. I just wanted to share that piece.
That is awesome. So Luxottica brought two DEI leaders out to the world. Look at that.
Hey, Natasha, I think Lisette and Camille will hand out some kind of gift code to attendees today. So look for that in the chat box. Yeah. So.
For some luxury lenses.
For some luxury lenses.
Listen, still have an addiction.
These are still my freebies.
I agree, Wade. Look at the stars aligning. It's a small world.
It is.
So Wade, this question is going to be for you. How should business leaders meaningfully incorporate DEI into their business? And how can they spot areas of opportunity?
Thanks, Natasha. So when I think about how leaders can move forward with meaningful and impactful work, there are three things I would encourage them to do. First is to listen, then to act, and then measure, right? We have to take moments, and leaders, we have a difficult time doing this at times, but we have to listen to our team members. Going around, whether it's a listening tool or creating focus groups, gives us an opportunity to hear directly from team members what their hopes are, what their dreams are, but also what their concerns are at the organization to really bring change to that organization. But more than that, you just can't listen. It just can't be about words. You actually have to act. And so I think this is where a lot of organizations get stuck. They say things, right? They talk about their intentions. They talk about these where they stand in their commitments. But they don't really show up in the way where that audio and video is in sync, right? And so you have to actually do some things to move the needle forward. And what I would say, especially, you know, what we heard from employees after the murder of George Floyd is, I hear you, thank you for listening to us, but don't tell me, show me, right? And so you have to actually move the needle by whether it's, you know, setting goals around the workforce diversity, right? Whether it's actually going in and make some structural changes to the hiring process or succession planning, but doing those things that are actually going to move the needle, right? Both culturally and systemically at the same time. And then lastly, measure, right? It's not enough, again, to have these goals if you're not going to hold people accountable. That's one of the reasons I believe a lot of team members are still, you know, questioning whether these commitments are real or not, because no one's being held accountable. So as long as you can be clear and transparent with those goals, but also how you're going to measure those goals and continue to, in a people-centric way, communicate what progress you're making, or if you're not making progress. That again is a way I would say for organizations and leaders to move forward in an impactful way.
Thank you, Wade. I do agree. What doesn't get measured doesn't matter. Right. So if we don't measure it and then act on what those results are, we tend to stay in the place that we were when we got started.
That's right. And what that measurement looks like, that accountability looks like, is going to change over time. Initially, it could be that you show up and you know, share some lagging or leading metrics. Over time, for those more mature organizations, what I've seen them do is actually begin to tie compensation to those measurements, right? And that sends a very powerful signal, a strong signal to those team members that they're taking this seriously.
Thank you. Lisette, I'm going to transition to you and I'm going to ask, what is one of the biggest challenges that companies face when they're committed to DEI sustainability?
Yeah, so it's a good segue to what Wade was talking about, when you guys were ending up talking about metrics. And everything Wade said is true. You got to listen to your folks. You got to have listening sessions. You have to really build a SWOT analysis, right, to understand where you're going. You got to understand where the strengths are, your weaknesses, your opportunities, where your threats are, and build that into a strategy. But one of the biggest challenges, and I'm going to challenge the panel with this too, it's not setting organizational goals that are tied to incentives. Okay. Wade mentioned it about compensation. Most people say what gets measured gets done, but I challenge that because we measure a whole lot of things that don't get done. A whole lot of things that don't get done. If it's not tied to your incentives and what you get as a bonus at the end of the year, people don't focus on those particular things because there's too many things that we do measure. We have to work with our C-suite leadership, help them understand, create a sense of urgency with the work that we're doing and operationalize it and make it part of the organization-wide enterprise goal. And you can't have a whole lot of them. So I don't want to trick people, into thinking you can have, 5 different measures as an incentive goal in an organization. You can't. It's probably going to be 1, maybe 2, if you're lucky, maybe 50% weighting against the other goals within that particular suite of incentives. And you're going to really work hard to build an analysis and create benchmarks against that. And you have to be responsible for it. But those goals are incredibly important. What we did here at Jefferson was begin to analyze where we had the largest disparity. And that was having underrepresented minorities in leadership roles starting at supervisor, not even vice president. We're talking supervisor. And I had to work hard to, build what that looked like for the organization and how it had a major disparity, even with mirroring our own community and the benchmarks established through Saratoga benchmarks through SHRM. And being able to tell that story and work with our leadership to create a goal to increase our URM leadership starting at supervisory level was a huge achievement for this organization and tie it to incentives. And in the first year, we didn't make it. That was fine because we were in the pandemic. But in the second year, we went up 2 points. And to increase our leadership in our organization. And it works, and you have to work hard to maintain that. Now, you can measure a whole lot of other things because you also have to keep track of gender equity. You have to keep track of attrition. You also have to keep track of promotions within your organization and employee engagement, supplier diversity. All those other measures matter as well. But you have to, and the challenge is if you don't connect it to incentives in your organization, folks will not pay attention to it.
Agreed.
And that's a big piece. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Yeah. So sorry. I get talkative. I like listening to my own voice. But sustaining also DEI work, it's an issue. Also, there's a lot of ebb and flow in organizations because you have a lot of turnover. People leave. You have, different folks not following through with commitments, and that's another big challenge with an organization. So creating a method to sustain that work with critical people and a team of volunteers that keeps track of this work for you and it's leader-led really helps with sustaining the work as well. And a lot of times, folks come to me asking me, what am I doing to improve inclusion or diversity? And my question back to them is, what are you doing? Because, as whatever size organization you are, and we're 42,000, I can't be everywhere. DEI is an operational focus in an organization. It's not just an HR focus, it's an organizational focus. And everyone has a responsibility in maintaining the access into their departments and creating an inclusive environment that is equitable for all your employees. And that is key. And each leader of those departments and even everyone part of those departments can play a role in making that happen. So, we are here to partner, coach, consult, provide education tools, and get people the what they need in order to create those environments, but they have to apply the work. And that's intentional for the leadership. And that's why it's a challenge, because a lot of people don't see that it's their responsibility. They think it's me, that I have to go and change people. But as DEI leaders, you can't change people. You have to apply the work in your department, and we can help you maintain that. So those are just a few challenges to sustaining it.
Thank you. Camille, this question is for you, and it piggybacks a little bit of what Lisette said. How can organizations' DEI strategy support their business strategy?
I love the natural bill that I think Lisette and I are having. I think I'll say for FINRA, right? FINRA is the Financial Industries Regulatory Authority, right? So our ability to support FINRA's mission of investor protection and market integrity takes it a step further. It makes DEI less of a strategy and more of a business imperative that helps us drive our ability to be successful within our actual mission, right? So that has long, thankfully, been established here at FINRA. So when we're thinking about, how DEI strategy can support the business, it is, where are the opportunities in the business? Are we familiar with our business needs? Are there quarterly or annual reports that we're looking at, right? Because we know as DEI practitioners, I'll say, that DEI can permeate every area of your business, right? DEI improves financial outcomes. It improves employee performance, right? To Lisette's point about retention and attraction and being able to be engaged with your employees and having them be satisfied with the work they're doing, right? DEI improves employee engagement. So making sure that first we're really clear about the goals and objectives that DEI or that the opportunities that we have to embed DEI in our business strategy or within the corporate goals, finding out what we're needing to meet or where the gap is or where the opportunity or the challenges are really helps narrow that strategy, right? Because then it could be some kind of compensation, goals tied to compensation within leadership. It could be, if attracting is a problem, there are opportunities, to change how we are engaging or marketing our companies and organizations, but being very specific and strategic, right? Because once we have that, we can have the language and the talking points to go behind it. Diversity improves profitability by, 15 to 21%, for gender diversity, and for ethnic diversity, 33 to 35%, right? Diverse management drives innovation and revenue. Improved financial performance, helps reduce disruption. Diverse boards improve company share prices. Closing gender pay gaps boosts the global economy, right? So what is the specific opportunity that we have? And then leveraging DEI as a strategic point or method to kind of close or work through opportunities and strategies to get there. And then you can figure out what the specific tasks that you want to do as a result of that. But again, a lot of this has to start, again, back to the points that the rest of the panel has been making, with leadership, with who are the decision makers within the organization, because the DEI strategies really need to be coming from them as a part of that overall organizational imperative. But again, where are the challenges? And then from there, we can leverage DEI as a tool or as a resource to kind of close those opportunities.
Okay, thank you. And to continue that conversation of DEI being everybody's responsibility, this question is for Camille and Lisette, coming from an HR perspective and then more of a medical or a hospital industry. Where does DEI belong in an organizational structure? And should DEI be relegated to the HR department only? And
I can start if it's helpful. I think, again, given that DEI is an imperative, regardless of where you are in the organization, it has to be a part, either a C-suite or reporting to C-suite, right? But it has to have an opportunity to be able to permeate the business and not just departmental efforts. Now, of course, human resources, has that opportunity, right? And it is also structured in a way that you can liaise with other folks that also span the organization, right? So you have your learning, talent, and development, you have your business partners, you even have your benefits teams, but you have the parts of the organization that span and permeate throughout, but it still needs to be a part, I would say no less than one under the C-suite, because it has to be a leadership imperative. If the leadership doesn't understand why these efforts are happening, I think the rest of the panel has alluded to that. It's really pointless, right? You can say something as an imperative, you can put it out there, you can measure it, but that doesn't equate to movement, right? Leadership sets the tone. Leadership sets the imperatives. They say what's important and what's required of the business. So it has to be, I think DEI has to be a part of your leadership and C-suite strategy.
Yeah, so I completely agree with that. I'm going to take it a little step further. Number one, DEI is an operational function. It is 100% part of HR. It absolutely is, but it also is about part of a lot of other dimensions within an organization, and it's foundational. It's not a pillar of what you work on. It actually is part of every single thing that we do. And so for me, I report to the CEO. I think it's important that the CEO, everyone always screams, it starts with leadership. It starts with leadership. Well, if it starts with leadership, our CEO is our top leader, and he has to be equipped enough to know the language. And DEI professionals need to work with your CEOs so that they can speak the language, understand the business case, why it's important, why it's attached to our business strategy, and be able to speak to the movement of that and lay clear expectations for your organization for that movement. And when people hear it from the CEO and they see an incentive attached to enterprise KPI, that's when you'll see a lot of movement happen. And unfortunately, that has to be the way it is for a lot of initiatives, not just DEI, but it's incredibly important for DEI because we need to start seeing movement in creating access, to creating inclusion, and making it equitable for our clients, our customers, our patients, whoever it is we're working for. And so when you think about DEI, having it at the very top, it brings an opportunity for the team to work with departments like marketing, like communications, like for us, patient equity, cultural competency, external stakeholders, our supplier diversity. It's all of those pieces, including our people, is important. So it's foundational. I believe it needs to be, at the very top. You need to report to the top leader to set those expectations and make it happen.
Thank you both. Wade, what areas of DEI do you believe we're not giving enough attention to? And how do you think CEOs and/or DEI leaders should respond to these gaps?
Thanks, Natasha. I heard a number of things from Lisette and Camille that I want to touch on in a second. But I think this first component of this is ownership, right? I think this is what I still continue to see at organizations is, this is Lisette's job and her team's job to do this. And no one really wants to take on the ownership. And it really does belong to everyone, right? Everyone has the power, the authority, and influence to really make an impact. So I think first, that's one thing that we need to continue to make sure we hammer home. The second thing I continue to see at organizations is while we talk about DEI, a lot of organizations still focus on diversity alone. And so they set goals around workforce hires, and that's great, right? But it's almost liken it to when you invite someone to your home, right? I don't know about you. When I invite people to my house, I want to make sure it's in good order. And so when you invite people to your home, these new team members, right? You've gone out to recruit them. You bring them into a culture that's not inclusive. That's not a place of belonging. And so what happens? It's an revolving door, right? So we've got to make sure that organizations are indeed creating an inclusive space first, right? The third thing I'd say I continue to see is that organizations and leaders do not know how to move talent, right? You have, it's one thing to have these goals, right? But it's another thing to have managers and leaders that know how to move talent. What I mean by that is, do you know how to coach? Do you know how to give proper feedback to members of your employee? Do you know how to make sure you're setting them up whether it's with mentor programs or some other program that can help them be successful in those roles. So those are a couple of things that I see, but I think the last piece is, again, it even goes back to sort of that foundational aspect, which is these leaders and that organization still understanding that they have bias. I mean, believe it or not, as much, I know that we have hundreds of people here today that get that, but there are so many that still don't appreciate that they have bias, because in their minds, when they hear bias, they think something else. And so we still have to take care of some of those foundational items for CEOs and DEI leaders to really move the needle at these organizations.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to transition to the Great American Resignation that we've all seen and been a part of it over the past couple of weeks and months and years. And I want to start with Camille. I think the Bureau of Labor Statistics said 4.5 million individuals voluntarily left the workforce. How has having a DEI program within your organization helped you guys respond to the Great Resignation?
Having, been in human resources and connected to recruiting teams, this actually isn't too new of a conversation. And how do we, again, leverage DEI as an opportunity to help fill some of these challenges within the organization, right? So as we've talked about diversity being an imperative, and organizations and growing their success and being able to problem solve and attract new markets and expand their success rates and things like that. It is, how do we get people in, especially diverse, or people who identify as diverse into organizations without having them leave? Exactly to Wade's point, is the culture ready to support and sustain folks? And one thing that we've learned, particularly since 2020 and the social unrest occurred, is that people have a vested, or employees have a vested interest in where they work. So many people are taking the opportunity with this Great Resignation to not only reevaluate how they, spend their time in a 9-to-5 and what that work time and space looks like, but how does it impact their overall purpose? Right? 82% of employees, and I think this was EY, People Advisory Services came out with some statistics about how 82% of employees say it's important that their organizations see them as a person beyond, again, what their skill set or professional skill set is, beyond them just being an employee. So we see that being such a huge driver, the need rising, right? When you have statistics, it suggests that this has been studied. So once you, or as a part of understanding that need, understanding where the gaps are, right? Why aren't people feeling that their work is purpose-driven, or why are people leaving, right? And so understanding, the timing of all of the happenings in the world between the pandemic, and various social unrest. There was George Floyd, but there was also lots of other things going on with Breonna Taylor and other people across the world as well. So understanding that all of this, again, impacts how employees are going to be engaged, setting up resources and tools for them to be successful in this broader environment. So does that mean we need to look at benefit packages, right? To make sure that our employees have the support that they need in their home lives to be able to show up and be able to do their jobs and move things along at work effectively, right? Or as an employee resource groups, we need to talk about the work that we're doing to create spaces for employees to get together, and not just get together about their work, but talk about things that are important to them beyond, again, that work life, right? And then also one thing that we find with employee resource groups or business resource groups, that value kind of compounds when you allow people to get together. You also allow them to solution build. Right? So having them be a part of attracting your talent, leveraging your employee and business resource groups to be a part of that attraction, a part of that retention. Do we have programming that we can use to engage our folks? So really leveraging, different aspects of that, of the different aspects of DEI to really use that. Again, once you know what the goal is, what the objective is, then it's a little bit easier to come up and collaborate on strategies that are going to be effective to meet that goal, and then aligning the tasks with that. So I hope that, kind of closes, but when you're thinking about the resignation, really digging in, why are people resigning? Where are the gaps? What are the opportunities that we have? And then you can leverage DEI or see where DEI can be best leveraged to help accomplish those goals that are outstanding.
Okay. Thank you, Camille. Lisette, as new individuals are joining the workforce, how can organizations ensure that employees are allowed to bring their authentic selves when they show up?
Okay. So this is great because all your questions are like segues from what everybody else said. Wade started talking about, the focus too much on diversity. We got to look at inclusion, right? And Camille's talking about the same thing. It really is a matter of how do we create environments in which people can be their authentic selves. And so I want to share a couple of tools with you that we do here at Jefferson. And I think, folks can look into it. We've invested in a great program called Inclusion in Action. And Inclusion in Action is it's an e-learn that was produced by a company called Sun Shower Productions. Say that 10 times fast. Sun Shower Productions. Joel Lesko is the owner of Sun Shower Productions, and the work that they do in helping folks with these tools really builds upon how folks can set these expectations of inclusion in their department, but also help on building relationships, right? You got to talk to your team and new members to know and get to know folks better. You got to learn about their likes, their dislikes. You got to build relationships and understand, even what similarities you have, because research shows that the more similar you are and what you can find that are similar, you begin to look at people in a unique way. And that's important, especially when you're looking to build a relationship, but you're also looking to build that trust within your team. But, finally, what I want to say about this is, telling your team in an honest and most compassionate way, you got to lay down these expectations that everyone should bring their whole selves to work. You have to say the words and mean it and support folks in that effort. Make it a department priority, ask people to share who they are, whatever that is, so that people can feel comfortable when they come into work. And when you do that, you build such a great loyalty and trust in your folks. And the more you respect who they are and allow them to be their authentic selves, they're more likely going to stay. Because, and I think Camille can agree to this, people don't leave their roles because of money. They leave their roles because of people in the environment. They leave because they don't like who they're working with and they can't be who they are. And I think that's important. People are always jumping from one job to another because, it's often that task of I want to be who I am and I want to build that relationship and have that trusting relationship with the team where I can feel I can grow as me and not to be somebody else that like a robot they want that you often see. So it's important to talk to your teams. I encourage folks to utilize the Inclusion in Action tool. I think that's incredibly important. We provide a toolbox for all leaders, a toolkit that has all of the education, all of the tools that they need to help build an inclusive environment, because it's challenging to do so. But we make sure that folks have this at their fingertips to help improve upon that, because the more diversity you bring in is not going to help if your environment is not inclusive. Because if you do not have that environment of inclusion, you're going to lose the people you bring in.
Agreed. Wade, what trends are you seeing in DEI and what predictions would you make for future directions of the work?
Thanks, Natasha. So I'm going to just pick up what Lisette said, by the way. She mentioned the impact of inclusion and retention, right? And being able to thrive in those organizations. It also is what really brings the best out of those organizations in terms of innovation as well, right? If you don't have that psychological safety to raise your hand to get feedback, you definitely won't raise your hand to say, I have this brilliant idea. So I think having that kind of culture really matters. Also think that, I love hearing about the Inclusion in Action platform. One of the challenges I think organizations are still grappling with now is we have this new normal in terms of the workspace, right? You have this hybrid approach where you have some employees that are working completely remotely. You have others that are on site. We continue to hear from organizations that are just have decided that they're going to shrink their footprint. Instead of having 4 buildings, they have 1 building. And so what does that mean for having, continuing to have dialogue and interaction to create some of those connections that can be challenging at times if you're not set up to be a virtual inclusion champion, right? So I think organizations are still dealing with how to deal with this. The other part of this is, and I think Camille touched on this, we're starting to see the type of benefits that are being offered shift, right? Whether it's we're going to have more leave, right, for folks, or including caregiver leave. By the way, we saw some of that happen during the pandemic. It's not just about parental leave. It's also about caregiver leave to support elderly parents or others who might need that support. We've also seen things like we'll help pay your student loans, right, with your PTO. So those are the types of things we're continuing to see, what we call inclusive benefits at these organizations. And then the last thing I would say in terms of trends that we're seeing, and this is more of a watch area for organizations, depending on where you have locations. We're starting to see some fatigue happen across the country. So some of the state legislatures are actually enacting laws that are not DEI friendly, right? So we've seen in places like the state of Florida, they passed the Stop Woke Act, which says if you have a location in Florida and you meet a certain requirement in terms of the number of employees, you cannot require that your employees participate in certain DEI trainings, right? And so they have these concepts that they've outlined, but that goes further. I mean, you have some organizations or some states are saying, hey, if you adopt ESG, which DEI certainly has a connection there as part of how you analyze funds, then you can't be our money manager, right? So, which ends up having a negative impact on taxpayers long term. But those are the types of things that we want to continue to see in addition to the anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ legislation that we're seeing across the country. So while I know oftentimes we focus on DEI as HR, to Lisette's point, it touches so many other aspects of our work, of our organizations, in addition to thinking about it from the policy at the state and federal level. How do we make sure we're protecting those that work at our organizations and their families as well? So those are the things we're seeing, and I think what we'll have to look out for is where the companies will continue to be on the front lines, where governments might decide they're going to try to push back on some of this progress, whether organizations will come together to actually proactively make sure that indeed they're creating an inclusive environment for companies and organizations in those communities in those states.
Can I, Natasha, you're on mute, but I want to jump in if that's okay.
Yes.
Because what Wade is saying is so true. And I really want folks to understand how important your voice really means when you go to the voting booth and you understand what different states are doing. Now, I happen to work in an environment where I'm in healthcare, and I work in both Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And in New Jersey, that's the opposite happening to what's happening in like Texas and Florida, is where our state is actually mandating cultural competency training. They're mandating implicit bias training in perinatal care. They're mandating that LGBTQ inclusive fields are added into our electronic medical records. They're mandating that by the state. And if not, our hospitals, if they are not compliant, they have to pay a fine if they don't. and which I am incredibly proud of, because New Jersey is really taking part. And that's one of the trends that I see happening in this state, but every state is different. So you have to pay attention to what's happening in your state and let your voice be heard in that voting booth, and understand the rights that are taken away from people when such things like what Wade was talking about, especially with our LGBTQ rights in Florida and in Texas and in other states of our country. And so it's important for us to pay attention to that and vote and be sure that we're a part of the mission to making our environments, our whole regions, our whole states, our whole country inclusive, because that's important for us to take that move, because we're seeing this happen more and more, and the future is going to be different by what our states dictate now. So it's important for us to get involved in that capacity. So thank you, Wade, for bringing that up, because that's incredibly important.
That is. Thank you, Wade. Camille? I didn't know if you had a comment.
No, I totally
Okay.
agree, and actually have some bullet points for some of the next
Okay.
question. I'm a little excited to brag on my company, but I think I can hold off and make that a part of the next question if it's easier.
Well, let's transition. Thank you, Wade and Lisette, for those points and making sure that all of our attendees understand that we need to know what's going on in our state. But further than that, we need to make sure that our voice is heard in any possible way that we can. But I do want to transition and allow you guys to brag a little bit. So our next question is, what is one successful initiative or best practice that your organization has identified concerning creating a culture of inclusiveness? And Wade, I'm gonna start with you.
Thanks, Natasha. One thing I would add, just to go back to our last question, if a lot of organizations are concerned about being on an island when they raise their voice or advocate on a particular issue, I would encourage you to make sure you're connected with your chambers of commerce, right, at the state level as well. And there are other business coalitions that you can join to make sure your voices are being heard. So I'll just brag on one of my clients and something that we have found to be really impactful in creating an inclusive environment. And all the times you hear about programs that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, we do simple fireside chat series with employees. And I know this is something that we do with ERGs and others, but that proximity matters. And as much as we talk about the various concepts and the importance of doing the work, hearing directly from someone you work next to about their journey, about their experience, it does something to people. And I think it really, that storytelling ends up making more impact at times than bringing in folks for workshops. And you can do all of it, but I would just encourage those who are on this, who are attending this session, to really take a moment and think about how you can lift up those stories to the extent those team members are comfortable lifting up the stories of employees at your workplace, because their stories can really shift the perception, can really change how people want to get involved in the work, and could really, again, create more ownership of DEI at your organization.
Camille?
Happy to hop in. So, FINRA is not at all new to this work. There has been a framework that's been in place for well over a decade, and we've had leaders that, again, given our mission, have understood the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we've had the opportunity, particularly in the last few years, not to be reactive. We've had formal programming for 10 years. We've had ERGs, our employee resource groups in place, for well over a decade as well. So from a problem-solving perspective, it was about helping to raise those diverse perspectives, give them voice and opportunities from a retention and attraction, give them opportunities to raise opportunities for within the organization, right? There is strength and community. There's strength in galvanizing voices, especially around common goals and objectives, right? So because FINRA has been in this space where we have been intentional for some time, we've already had that great story to tell, which really positioned us well around the great sort of recession and things like that. And we've been able to leverage not just our programming within our employee resource groups, but also align them with our programming with human resources and overall business strategy. So we've been able to constantly surface DEI imperatives that were supporting our employees and our missions and employees through not just COVID, but through George Floyd, through unrest, and through the constant change we've all experienced. And that's created a certain level of agility within our organization, or supported a level of agility within our organizations. So more recently, building on all of that pre-work that has already been established, what we've been able to do is we've evolved our Diversity Leadership Council, right? And now our management committee members serve as our executive Diversity Leadership Council. So we have, our stakeholders that are really doing the work within their business units, connecting community, making sure we're having all of the relevant stakeholders to move these imperatives along. But also the imperatives are set with that executive C-suite, knowing that they are accountable as our executive Diversity Leadership Council, right? So creating these business unit goals, which within each of our business units, right? So how is DEI an imperative part of the strategy? Is it around engagement, right? Is it around attracting talent within technology, or attracting talent within our enforcement or legal departments, right? Or is it about engaging and retaining the talent we have, but not only talent-based, how is it impacting our ability to, again, support our mission of investor protection and market integrity? That's going to be throughout the entire organization, because that is a part of who we are and what we do. So leveraging, again, every single business unit has these DEI goals and DEI's imperatives for the next year. And we'll continue to, hold them accountable as the leaders and as sort of the owners of those strategies. They're going to be the ones responsible, and in many instances, helping us report back to the organization about the progress that they've made. So it's, again, leveraging the fact that we've been doing this work for some time and really making sure we have systems, or we're solidifying rather the systems that have already been in place for us to do checks and balances, hold ourselves accountable, see where we're making progress, and see where we have opportunities to continue making progress. But the lens is literally in every leader across the organization's mind. I'll also say, and I know this is one thing that I've kind of expanded, but then also as a part of our learning and development, again, with all of this being in each of our leaders' minds, I'm grateful that the head of our diversity, equity, and inclusion team, my job is not to come in and present, hey, this is what you need to do. What do you all need us to facilitate, right? Again, making sure that the ownership is back on them and what they need to be successful. And we're just a vehicle to help see that success happen, right? But how are we aligning? How are they utilizing us? How are we utilizing each other? But again, standardizing those processes, standardizing those practices, but making sure the expectation is across the board. And then a lot of our job, or a lot of my job within human resources, is also making sure we have vehicles within the organization to support that culture and to support that expectation. So another thing I'm really proud of is that we've continuously evolved every 2 years our iteration of unconscious bias to focus on inclusion, or to introduce inclusion into the workplace, introduce equity into the workplace. What does this mean, not just for leadership and our, the talking points that we want to give, but what does this mean for our day-to-days as employees and the work that we're trying to do? And again, falling back on that mission of investor protection and market integrity, how does that impact our success and our ability to do that, right? And so I think, Lisette called out some of the opportunities that she's had to expand training and mandatory training within her own organization. So really, very similarly, aligning, again, once you know what the needs and the opportunities you have with the organization, you have the chance to really be strategic about how you're meeting them.
Thank you, Camille. Lisette?
Yeah, so everything Camille said and Wade said, we do as well. And I just want to take it to a different level, because I know Natasha wants me to talk about this. So supplier diversity is often a topic that's not discussed, and it's not that, fancy or whatnot. But it is incredibly important for an organization to commit to. And of course, you all know I was a buyer in my past life, and I am passionate about this work and making sure that our local businesses get their fair shares, working with these big corporations that take up a lot of space in your community. And it's important to have that happen. And I partner a lot with Chamber of Commerce's. I want to make sure that our local community is involved in contracting opportunities with our organization. Our mission in supplier diversity is to increase the percentage of business that we do with both minority and women-owned businesses. It is important that we partner with our chambers to understand who is in our community that we can partner with, and getting them involved with presenting who they are directly to our decision makers in our departments here at Jefferson. And that's key. It's important because I know there are companies out there listening to us right now saying, well, I've talked to this big organization and they told me to go to some portal and put my name and my company information, and I never heard back from them. That happens all the time. And what we did to make it more inclusive for our community is to create an initiative here at Jefferson called Supply Chain Connect. We don't want any local vendor saying that we've ignored them, that they didn't have access into our organization for business. We have an opportunity for folks that when we have an open to bid contract, that we invite those vendors that meet that same criteria to come and present right in front of our stakeholders. And it's kind of like set up like a Shark Tank. But every other Tuesday, we have our stakeholders come in with whatever bid it is. Say if it's snow removal, we'll have all our snow removal MWBEs come in and present. And then a selection is made. And that's important to us because we want face-to-face contact, whether it's via Zoom or in person. We want folks to have that direct contact and access and know who our buyers and our purchasing managers are, to make sure that they get in front of those decision makers instead of having their names be put into some, portal and never get connected with. So for us, this initiative, we started it about a year and a half ago. And we're meeting with our local vendors every other Tuesday and having our supply chain and our decision makers actually listen to presentations and make decisions on who they're going to bring in into the organization. That's our way of connecting with our external stakeholders in our community, creating economic inclusion, and making real efforts to make change with how we do business with Philadelphia and New Jersey.
Hey, Natasha, you mind if I piggyback on what Lisette said? I think that's so important. So just kudos to you and your organization for doing that, because we all, again, once again, we think about inclusion, DEI, just within our four walls. But you have to remember that your employees, they leave at 5 o'clock, whatever time it is, and go out into a community that is also important for them to feel that sense of belonging, that sense of connection. One thing that is not necessarily for a client that we've done, but we have created and hosted what we call the DEIB Collaborative. And we invite all the various chief diversity officers and any organization that's focused on culture, that sometimes includes our philanthropic community and partners, to a session so we can hear about some leading practices, what's happening in these communities with their organizations, but also look for opportunities to collaborate, right? Again, we want to try to make sure that we're thinking beyond those four walls so that when they go to restaurants, when they go to other places, right, they still can feel that sense of connection. Now, it may not necessarily for Baltimore and Philly, but for places like Greenville and Chattanooga and Huntsville and those other locations, right, that may be smaller, mid-sized cities without, 60, 70% diversity, right? We want to make sure we're working to do that, because oftentimes it's hard to recruit people to those communities if they don't feel like they can do things beyond the office.
Yeah. I want to build upon, organizations' responsibility to this work. Okay. I know there are a lot of small businesses listening to us today that are from the Greenville area and you're listening, but there's corporations listening too. And when you have a large corporation and you are brick and mortar and you take up space in a community, you have a responsibility to the local vendors that are there, that are working day to day so hard to be entrepreneurs, to really achieve that American dream of being owners of a business and making an impact to that community, because they're also responsible for the families that are working for them. So it's important for large organizations, when you have a brick and mortar, to take that responsibility and partner with your Chamber of Commerce's, with your minority supplier development councils within your communities and get to know who your vendors are and understand what opportunities there are to be competitive as well with some contracts that you have.
Agreed. And thank you both for that information. And I'm excited to watch, Lisette, what you guys continue to do with the Supply Chain Connect. And I'm excited to continue to look into your DIB collaboration that you guys have with Wade, just to see, you know, what we can do in the Greenville area to make sure that we are utilizing those minority suppliers with the corporations and businesses we have here in Greenville. So thank you both for that. We're right at 3 o'clock. So we're going to transition to Elvia for some questions that have come into the chat box, and then I'll come back and close us out.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for everyone's input. We do have a question. It's a pretty easy question. All of you guys are experts in DEI, and it's just wanting to know, what is your biggest advice for getting started in the world of DEI?
I can start.
Any of you?
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, you know, so the first thing really in really getting started, for me, I think I've said this before. Everyone needs to understand that DEI is an operational function to your organization, and you have to make it a strategic initiative for your organization. So, you know, really since the beginning of my career, and you know, I've pivoted my career. So I started as a buyer, but I went into DEI, and as I went into DEI, I learned that still the same work that I did to strategize as a buyer still played a good effect in really building an operational blueprint for DEI within an organization. And I used the teachings, and maybe some of you may have heard of him, Dr. John Kotter, Kotter, John Kotter. He is a Harvard professor, and he wrote an incredible book called Leading Change. And in that book, he has 8 steps for leading change in any organization. And the first few things you really have to do to really begin the process, if you don't have a DEI program or you want to reimagine it in some way, is you have to create a sense of urgency. Dr. Kotter really talks about how do you inspire people to act, right, with a passion and a purpose to achieve a really bold or aspirational opportunity. You have to build that momentum that excites people to pursue a compelling vision for the future. And you can do that as a DEI leader, understanding what that business case is and building that sense of urgency for folks to say, we really need to do this. That's really one of the first steps in helping you create that strategy you need, because DEI is operational. You got to build then, you know, a guiding coalition. You have to have a good volunteer network. Camille talked a lot about the ERGs and the business resource groups. Diversity councils are incredibly important for those folks that you can recruit throughout the organization, because you're going to find a lot of people have passion for DEI. And if you get those people rallied to work and create action plans for their particular departments, or if you're large enough a division, you're going to have a great future to build a strategic vision for your organization and to keep that going and be consistent. So those are just a few things that you should really start off with, but I would recommend for anyone to implement any initiative is to follow Dr. Kotter's Leading Change. He's got 8 beautiful steps that really help you in being successful as a strategist and creating operational plans. And it's important for everyone to understand how strategic DEI is to be successful.
Thank you for that, Camille. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can hop right on in and really just sort of build on what Lisette has already shared with us. I was at a conference the other week, and one of the presenters shared a quote: "He who controls the narrative controls the outcome." Right. So much of I find this work is making sure you know your audience, making sure you know the narrative of your organization, the narrative of your employees, connecting with people, what's important to the organization, right? And once you have that narrative and you have an understanding of the importance, and I try to do it at different levels, right? Then you can really get involved strategically. So much in 2020, we talked about allyship, but I think this question really builds on advocacy and decision making and actual change making, right? So I think a lot of it is being or setting yourself up to learn and getting involved with business projects, talking to your management, talking to your leaders, and letting them also know what's important to you. If you don't have, I'd say, of course, shocker, please, make sure you're involved in your business and your employee resource groups. There's power, again, there's strength in that community. There are resources in that community because you all can learn, again, that narrative. How do you talk successfully about the work and the needs within the organization to be able to move things along and again, really be a change maker. But a lot of that is sitting back, I find, depending on where you are with your organization, some of that might be listening, learning, and then starting the opportunities to challenge and poke. And these are the opportunities we have. And this is the needs that we think this will meet. But again, partly going back again, piggybacking on what Lisette said, when you have the ideas of the objectives, again, you're better able to narrow in on the strategy about what's going to be most helpful, but really connecting with people at every level, from employees to the change makers and the decision makers in the audience, so that you can be effective, but making sure you have the language to do that. And again, once you're really, I find it success, I find that I am able to do that the more I'm around communities that talk and have these conversations. It equips me with the language to be able to speak back about the needs. And I found that to be incredibly effective.
Perfect. Thank you, both of you, for contributing to that question. Well,
can I add one quick thing? And I don't want to be redundant here, but I do think it's important for two things. One, Lisette mentioned the sense of urgency. And, I spent most of my career advising clients on how to mitigate risk, right, from things. And at this point, I would tell my clients it's a risk if you don't do this now, right? We understand that high performers, they want to go in places that are organizations that are inclusive. So if you're not doing this work, you're risking not only not attracting great talent, but you risk losing talent. And the other thing I would say is you're not alone, right? Although you are, I understand that that's a question for their organization. Know that you're not alone. There are lots of coalitions out there, whether it's CEO Roundtable, your particular industry or trade group, they might have a trade association, they might have a coalition of organizations that you can work with, partner with, and also just chat with about their own journey. So I just put those two things out there to add to the great things that Camille and Lisette said.
Thank you so much to all of you. So still along those lines, we have a question from our Visit Greenville folks. Gladys Sosa, thank you so much for contributing to the chat. Are there any podcasts or any recommended leadership topics or websites that you just can think of when it comes to DEI that you would like to share with those in attendance?
So I think Wade and Camille, we're probably all going to say, follow Dr. Nika White. She has phenomenal podcasts on diversity and inclusion and equity. She is a champion of this work. So follow her, sign up and join her podcast issues. But I also, on a national basis too, we help our folks connect through Diversity Inc. They have what's called best practices in diversity and inclusion. And it is a membership. It is the subscription you have to purchase. But what it provides folks within your organization are great webinars, learnings, white papers. They have what's called, every month they issue what's called a meeting in a box, which is great information to have conversations with your employees about whatever national observance is happening that month. So examples like Hispanic Heritage Month, we just ended National Disabilities Month, or whatever national federal observance is happening, they issue a meeting in the box, which is a PDF full of just great information that you can share and build awareness on and help with cultural competence in that way. But they also offer a survey that folks can complete to help them understand where they are on the spectrum of diversity management to help you get better with your diversity programming, called the Top 50. And Diversity Inc. really does pay attention to helping folks get better. And if you complete it and you don't make the list, they even have a team to help you understand how to have a better diversity management initiative in your organization. So I recommend Diversity Inc. I have others, but I'll let others chime in on what they recommend.
So I think very similarly to Diversity Inc., there is Saramount, which is formerly Diversity Best Practices. They provide very similar opportunities for regular engagement, learning throughout your organization, white papers and readings that can be passed along, a lot of opportunities to absorb diversity best practices, lots of opportunities to absorb those within very different mediums, quick bites, larger engagement opportunities where you can engage people, that work within that organization to touch base with you and your leadership. But again, kind of going back to identifying where you have those opportunities, I think regardless of the size of your business, FINRA is about 3,700 folks, really proud, that because of our engagement efforts, we're really standing with some of those Fortune 500 companies and larger organizations when we're measuring our practices against, those surveys that they have the opportunity to see where you're aligning with. But seeing where the opportunities are within your organization and then finding a vehicle. Again, there are lots of external organizations, Diversity Inc., Saramount, Diversity Best Practices. Gartner research is really good, particularly amongst human resources and business professionals as well. There's tons of wealth of information around these DEI topics within those platforms as well. But seeing again what your needs are and aligning those with the proper organizations. I leverage LinkedIn a lot, doing a little search to see, what kind of Nika White-esque experts might pop up on my search bar. But leveraging again, finding the needs, and then I think it's a bit easier to find some of the vehicles that you can leverage. But Diversity Inc., Diversity Best Practices, NWC, and Nika White and all that good stuff are great places to start.
Thank you so much for that. Another question that we have earlier, I know Natasha spoke about, like a bragging right moment, like the goods. But a question that came through is, in your DEI careers, what has been an action that you propose for the benefit of growing DEI that you felt kind of had a little bit of pushback, that you kind of had to work a little bit harder to get it to go through?
I think my connection, I'll start with that one. I'd say transparency, sharing data. I think organizations were very hesitant to do that, to put their information out there for a number of different reasons. And I think legally, I get the concern, but we just weren't able to, even in the research with various organizations, weren't able to determine that there was going to be a lot of negative impact from doing that. So I think sharing data was a big has been a big issue at organizations, but I think we're evolving or getting to a place where they're a lot more comfortable doing that, whether it's through ESG and other regulations that are doing that for those publicly traded companies. I think the other other programs that are specific to underrepresented talent, creating programs that are specifically for those groups at times can get pushed back. But again, at the end, I know for an organization I worked with, we were able to get that through and saw significant increases in promotions based on the program.
Thank you for that, Wade. I think we have room for one more question before we head over to our next sessions. It is 3:12, so we want to make sure that we stay on top of the time for all the participants. This question is from Jamie Davis. How do you keep your DEI initiatives from becoming focused on one or two specific aspects, such as ethnicity and gender, and ensure that you are really growing in diversity and inclusion for all people?
I love that question, and I'll hop on in. One of my favorite DEI quotes, is "All boats rise with the high tide," right? So oftentimes, if you have an effort focused around one affinity, you might be surprised how that can positively impact other groups. So when we talk about a part of our evolving the diversity, equity, and inclusion learning was talking about diversity, what diversity is, right? And identifying it beyond potential physical markers or physical characteristics that you think might provide you insight into who a person is, right? But expanding on that definition to all of the dimensions of inclusion or to all of the dimensions of diversity, and really setting that expectation, right? Again, making sure we have vehicles to set the tone and the culture and the expectations, right? But from there, it is less about it, and I say this knowing that we, again, through our ERGs and our other resource group opportunities and other communities within our FINRA organization, there are still those very specific programmings to help very specific individuals. But as a part of that, as a part of having a cohesive diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, we know that what impacts one person in one group, again, exactly how we were able to move into the COVID, the hybrid environment, right? And have our parents network support the changes, because they had some learned agility there, right? But when you create these communities and these opportunities and you create this transparency, it allows for the other communities to galvanize. But again, it increases the need, the benefits once you're able to say, hey, we impacted or we introduced this here and it affected this group here in a really positive way. That has been incredibly effective, but it's about creating that transparency and creating the ability to try.
Well, we definitely thank everyone for participating. It always happens like this towards the end. Everybody just starts getting all, excited and asking questions. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of this session. So on behalf of the Greenville Chamber's 6th Annual DEI Summit, and of course, our annual presenter, the Michelin North American Group, we want to say thank you to all of you for your time. And at this moment, we're going to allow our participants to go ahead and log out of this session and join us in the next session. So once again, we thank all of you, Lisette, Camille, Wade, and of course, Natasha. Thank you so much for facilitating this session. And once again, we will see you guys next year for more interesting topics on DEI.